So it's 7 o'clock. Call meeting order, please.
Yes, sir. Chair Philseth.
Present.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Schmidt.
Here.
Councilmember Wolbach.
Here.
4 present.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the first meeting of the Finance Committee in 2016. The first item on the agenda is oral communications, and members of the public may speak to any item not on the agenda. And,
We did not receive anything for oral communications tonight.
okay. In that case, we'll proceed to action item 1, recommendation of the City Council to accept the cost of services study for planning fees and adopt a schedule of implementation of fees, increases, and adjustments. And the procedure is, if I get this right, the staff will present, and then we'll have oral communications from the public, and then we'll have questions and comments and motions from the committee. Sorry? Very good.
Excellent.
You
Chair
have the floor.
Philseth, council members, Hillary Gittleman, the department director, and I have the A team here, Sherry, John, Cara from the city attorney's office. We're all here to answer questions on the proposal before you, which is to adjust the user fees that we charge related to planning activities. So Sherry has a brief presentation, and then all the rest of us are available to answer questions.
Chair Philseth and members of the committee, my name is Sherry Nixlott. I'm the Senior Management Analyst for the Planning and Community Environment Department. Tonight we're coming to you with our cost of services study. Staff is asking that you review the cost of services study and recommend that the City Council adopt a schedule for fee increases and adjustments. In 2013, the city undertook a comprehensive cost of services study. Due to the complexity of planning and development fees and the anticipated split at that time of the planning department into planning and development services, planning fees were not part of that final study. Fees for services, or user fees, are charged when providing a service from which one or more individuals benefit. A key objective of the study was to determine the cost of providing these services. It's been at least 5 years since the last user fee was done for planning fees. The department brought in a consultant to review our current fees and analyze the cost of providing these planning services. Another objective was to analyze fees consistent with the city's adopted cost recovery policy. Council adopted a cost recovery policy last year, establishing high, medium, and low categories of recovery, and based on that policy, planning activities generally fall within the group recommended for a high level of cost recovery. The study identified cost of providing service, but it's up to the council to determine if they wish to set fees at full cost recovery or something less. Fees cannot be set to exceed the cost of services, and one fee cannot be increased beyond the cost of service to make up for another you wish to set at a lower cost. However, whether or not the council wishes to set the fees at a lower rate or whether to fully cost recover is a policy decision left to council. The study also looked at the department's fee structure with an eye to recommend 2 types of fees consistent with current workload and to make them simpler where possible. The 2 types we currently have in place, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Once costs were determined, staff's objective was to recommend any fee changes and suggest implementation approaches. The study identified the amount of time it takes for staff to perform directly related tasks. For staff time, productive time was computed for each position, removing hours, unproductive hours, what are considered unproductive hours of sick leave, vacation, training, and the like. The study also identified operational costs, like our on-call consultants. I think you're familiar with our on-call consultants. And identified indirect costs, such as the cost of managers and support staff, as well as citywide overhead for the central servicing departments like ASD, city manager, and the like. The result is the suggested fee updates and updated hourly staff rates. Fees for services in the planning department are structured in 2 ways: flat fees and deposit-based fees. Flat fees cover the cost of providing services for those activities which an average amount of processing time and effort can be reasonably determined. Deposit-based fees are taken when staff time is expected to vary widely, as it does with some of the more complex activities. A deposit amount listed in the municipal fee schedule is collected at the start of the activity, and then costs are to deliver those services are drawn down against the deposit. Staff recommends right-sizing both flat fees and deposit-based fees and updating hourly staff rates applied to deposits. Staff also recommends modifying the structure of some fees to streamline them and to be consistent with the way services are delivered. In other words, the flat fees or deposit-based fees. For fees that are increasing, staff recommends phasing in the increases over 2 years due to the magnitude of the changes. The first phase would be effective fiscal year 17, and the second phase in fiscal year 18, bringing fees to full cost recovery. Exceptions to the phasing are the wireless fees and any fees that may have gone down. Oh, I missed one. Sorry. Upon the Finance Committee's recommendation, staff will develop an ordinance, provide notice to interested parties, and notice and schedule a public meeting for approval of the changes. In accordance with state law, once council's approved changes, they'll go into effect no sooner than 60 days. In this case, staff recommends that they become effective fiscal year 17 and that they are included in the fiscal year 17 municipal fee schedule. The consultant is here with us tonight. Staff and the consultant will be happy to address any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll now take comments from communications from the public. We have one speaker, Mr. McFall.
Yes. Where would you like?
Please, you have the mic.
Thank you. I'm Jim McFall. I'm a practicing architect in Palo Alto. I've lived and worked here for over 30 years. I don't think most of you know me. I've been out of circulation as far as the city goes for a while, but I've been both a member of the ARB and the HRP. A few comments on the cost of services study and proposed fee increases. As you know, the study looked at staff costs for various planning services, then compared those to the costs for the associated fees charging for those planning services, thus showing where shortfalls occur and suggesting where to increase fees to cover the cost of those services in order to maximize cost recovery. Makes sense. But I think there's a step that's been left out of this process. It's a review of the cost of services. Excuse me. Has any review of those staff time expenses been undertaken? Was there any analysis of staff time spent on specific planning services? Before moving forward on increasing costs, on increasing fees, shouldn't we take a look at the staff costs to make sure they are reasonable and appropriate? Doesn't it make sense to consider ways to facilitate planning services in a more efficient manner before you go ahead and increase fees? Some of the proposed fee increases are significant, more than double the fee for a minor ARB review, increasing the planning fees for a second-story addition by 70%. That's $3,000 of an increase. This is significant money, and not everyone who does a project in Palo Alto works at Facebook or Google. The Development Center went through an extensive process of self-examination, review of processes, and training in order to maximize efficiencies and better serve the public. I, and from others I've talked to, think that's been a big success. Why hasn't the planning department undertaken a similar process? When the city is considering raising planning fees significantly, shouldn't we make certain that the costs upon which those proposed fees are based are justified and reasonable? Thanks very much.
Thank you. With that, we're open for questions and comments from the committee.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
A procedural question. Are these mics hot?
I think so. Yep, they're always on.
They're live. And then what do we do about mics over here? And I take it you're the consultant?
I am.
Would it be reasonable to have the consultant sitting at the table?
So unfortunately, there's only a couple of mics that are live at the table, so the gentleman will have to go to that mic or we move out.
Okay. Okay.
And then we will share the mic between the three of us.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Maybe we can fix that.
Yeah, it's on the queue.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Councilmember Singh.
Let's see, let me just get my bearings, ask a couple of general questions. These are planning department fees we're talking about.
Correct.
although the activities that take place seem to include a lot from the general staff, the legal, buildings, development center, and so on. So there's a lot of varying activities. These are planning fees, and then there are a separate study going on for the development center. Their fees, I assume a lot of these fees would be the same. Or if you could just give me a sense of what we're doing tonight.
Well, the fees we're looking at tonight are definitely planning fees. And as you mentioned, there are times when there's a planning activity that other departments need to participate in as well and review and look at plans.
Well, a lot of these activities are in the development center, aren't they?
These are specifically planning activities. These are the activities that are conducted
But
by...
if a resident wanted to do one of these, they would walk into the development center, is that right?
No, the fees that we're talking about this evening are specific to the planning department and planning entitlements. So they're things like ARB reviews that you apply at the planning department. This does not include, building permits, encroachment permits, things that you would apply for at the development center. That's going to be a separate fee study.
IR?
IRs you apply for at the planning department, it's a planning entitlement. So the way the development center and the planning department are split, we think of the development center's application processing as ministerial permits. So there's not a lot of discretion. By the time someone gets through everything we put them through in planning with the discretionary approvals that we do, and they get over to the development center, they're in the ministerial world, and the processing happens. We're checking the code, checking the boxes, and making sure everything works. But these fees that we're talking about this evening are the planning entitlements. These are all discretionary actions. You see there's a lot of legal time involved because, we consult extensively with the city attorney in processing these discretionary applications.
Okay, good, that's helpful. Again, to get my bearings, let me just ask some specific questions going through some of the proposals. The consultant's report was very accurate when they said, the two things most questions are residents and permits. So let me start from individuals or residents. I look at types of these things that a resident might run into, and I guess a resident runs in two different ways, don't they? Either as a developer who's looking for change, or someone who sees change going on and says, what's happening? Both of those would come through the planning department, or would they end up in the development center?
Well, if a resident is an applicant, like they're applying for an IR, that would come through the planning department. If a neighbor notices something happening out there and wants to find out about it, it sort of depends on where it is in the process. If it's still going through the IR process, then their first stop would be with us, and they'd raise a red flag and potentially file an appeal. If the IR is already done, or it didn't need an IR and it's in the building permit process, then they'd be going to the development center.
Okay, I'm struck, I guess, on packet page 13 by the scale of some of the changes. You have their home improvement exception going up by 300%. That sounds like a lot. On page 15, you have preliminary individual review going up 300%. On page 17, public noticing is going up 400%. Parcel map 350. Talk a little bit about why the scale of change is so large on things that residents would.
Sure. Just, kind of big picture, I'm relatively new to Palo Alto, and my observation, when I got here is that this is an old fee study. You know, a lot of jurisdictions during the recession went through the process of updating their fees and increasing revenues by trying to better capture the cost of providing services. I don't believe that Palo Alto did that during the recession, and I think the fees that are currently in place are old. They've been adjusted a little bit to account for cost of living, but they've really haven't been re-examined holistically in quite some time. What we did in this study is really look at what it costs to deliver these services and give you our recommendation on that basis. But as Sherry indicated, it's entirely within your discretion to say, whoa, the proposed increase is too high. For HIEs, we should do something less than you're recommending. And that would just mean that we would perpetuate the current general fund subsidy of that application type.
You know, a member of the public got up and said, gee, at the same time, have we done, you know, a check on let's call it the efficiency of the staff?
Yeah, no,
Is
very
there something we should be looking at there?
right. Very good point. This analysis is based on the current processing time associated with these activities. To the extent that processing time could go down, some of the flat fees could potentially go down. I should point out, though, that a lot of the biggest fees we're talking about here are hourly fees. So we charge an hourly rate. And so if we achieve efficiencies on those projects, we just bill less hours.
Yeah.
So that is a nuance that I think is important.
I guess I see the difference in work scope fairly dramatic. Big projects coming in that come to the council, and you have volumes of consultants' report and studies and details, architectural details. But a lot of the work, in terms of numbers, must be residents making some minor change and adaptations in the housing. Are some of the hourly fees more appropriate for the big detailed commercial projects as opposed to the routine housing projects? And are the residents getting bumped up 300% for something is not relevant to their needs?
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, I mean, it is, as Jonathan's saying, it is set up so that the larger projects that take more time, there's more variability. We're using an hourly rate and billing our time directly. The smaller fees where there's ability to average and be, you know, we have a lot of consistency about what it takes to process this kind of smaller
Yeah.
application. That, you know, that's, we're recommending a flat fee. And again, you could set a lower flat fee if you think it's called for. Just to clarify again, though, if someone's applying, you know, to, you know, for a tenant improvement or a residential remodel that doesn't have to come to the planning department, I mean, that's the vast majority of permitting that happens in the city. That happens at the development center, and it's not affected by this.
Oh,
Just-
so
Just as
these fees would
this is
not-
only planning. So we get about 70+ IR applications in a year, but the city processes, what, 3,000 building permit applications in a year?
So, okay.
There's a real difference. And what we do is more complicated, takes longer, and there are also fewer of these applications.
Yeah, I see. So it's a small percentage of them actually have to go through this process. I guess last question. If you're reacting to something that all of a sudden you see in your backyard, appeal or question what's going on, people say, oh, that's why we're paying our property taxes, to be protected from something that is intrusive, doesn't belong. Why do we have to pay a fee or an appeal fee?
So, in a scenario where a resident is seeing another home, two-story home being proposed, and there's some concern about that development, the way the process is set up in the code is that's actually not an appeal. That is a request for hearing. And we're proposing any fee for a request for hearing. It's still the flat fee that the applicant pays. So you just request the hearing, and we have the hearing, and then it goes on to the hearing. No fee to the applicant who might be concerned about that. For another type of project, say at a residential commercial interface or a multifamily, something that went to the architectural review board, there we do have an appeal fee. It's the same fee. I don't believe there's any change proposed to the appeal fee. So it's $280 now. No change is proposed to that, and it's significantly subsidized, but that we understand why we'd want to subsidize that fee. We are introducing a new fee, however, as it relates to appeals, so that the applicant who is generating this project, which is being reviewed by the city and perhaps the concern of a neighbor, we are requesting that we have the ability to charge the applicant for the additional time and resources that will be spent in processing that appeal fee. So that doesn't go to the resident, that would go back to the applicant if we have to do another 100 hours worth of work. The city's not picking up the dime for that. We're charging the applicant who has the project that they're processing through that's generated the controversy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that's very
That's
helpful.
a flat fee.
That's right. That's our
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Holman.
Sure. Thank you for doing this. Obviously, it's long overdue, so thank you very much for doing it. I have some questions too. I think Mr. McFall raises a good question about, how efficient are we? It's a different but related topic, certainly. So I have questions that don't really address that, but want to respect that. Okay, if that makes sense. So, one of the things that it has seemed to me for some time is that that code compliance maybe isn't done as early as it should be in the process or could be in the process. So you have projects that maybe go to the ARB or go to the HRB or whatever, but code compliance hasn't been performed. That's what it seems like. Maybe a preliminary code compliance has been performed, but maybe not totally. So errors are found and later, and just as from scattered information picked up or watching like pieces of ARB meetings and that sort of thing, and listening to the public at public meetings and such. So the ARB isn't responsible for making sure the project is code compliant, and so if that's at least the way I understand it, and have been told over time. So it seems to me that what I've witnessed is that you have projects that go all the way through the ARB or maybe through the HRB too, perhaps not so much planning commission, but things aren't necessarily code compliant, so there's like rework that needs to be done, or reconsideration because some error is found or something that wasn't checked is found. So it brings up how much time is spent that the applicant's being billed for, and also has to do with how much efficiency there is in what we're doing. So does it make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand your comments. I'm not sure that I fully agree with them. I think you have a professional staff. We're, a little overwhelmed because we're understaffed at the moment. We do our best to review for code compliance early in the process. We have a 30-day period when we receive an application in which we're reviewing for completeness to make sure we have all the materials we need with which to do an evaluation. And then as the project is prepared for hearing at the ARB or whatever the other process is, we're doing a review for code compliance. Clearly, there are many sections of our code, as the council knows, that involve interpretation. Sometimes we interpret it one way, and then it gets appealed, and it gets to the council or wherever, and it's reversed. So, these aren't all black and white decisions, but we do our best to do a professional and adequate review, and the projects that we, in large part, the projects that we act on, you never hear about. I talked about 70 plus IRs in a year. Out of that, 2 of them got appealed last year.
Mhm.
I mean, so the vast majority of what we do is review projects, complete the processing of them, and they just, move on without further comment.
So, and please don't hear my comments as being criticisms, because there is a lot of work that goes through. And it just seems like sometimes that not all of the preliminary work is done beforehand. And this is from like tuning in here and there. It's not like a constant stream of watching and making notes or something. It's checking in here and there on various meetings. So,
Can I offer just one comment on that too? I don't know if you mentioned the preliminary reviews. Did you mention that? So sometimes when we go to the, so we have this process in place. It's a little bit informal. The preliminary review before the architectural review board, and that's not an application that we charge
Right.
money for, and because we want to encourage people to go through that process, or if we do, it's a modest fee. The intent there, we're not spending a lot of time doing a code compliance check at a
Of course.
preliminary screening. Okay, so there could be some of that where you get some feedback at that
course.
level, and then
right,
fair
no,
enough.
I'm clear. I'm clear on that. Okay, did the consultant, and I don't know your name, sir? Dan, did you do any, did you take a look at any of the projects to say, okay, here's a project that was, and I don't know how you would know really, staff could inform you, but on your own you wouldn't know. Like, we've had some fairly large projects on Page Mill, some on Park Boulevard, for instance, one on El Camino. Did you have an opportunity to take a look at any of those and see comparatively, just looking at the project, as informed as you could be about them, just look at the scope and scale, were they comparatively in line with each other in terms of what was billed, and some get more complex and...
So, again, my name is Dan. You can call me Dan if you want to.
What's your last name?
Yeah, it's EDDS.
Thank you.
I go by Dan otherwise. So let me make sure I understand your question. So you're thinking you've got 2 projects.
Relative similarity in terms of what's billed based on at least appearances of scale of project.
So we have 2 projects of relatively the same. Depends on what kind of project you're talking about. So I think more in terms of fees. So you're doing an ARB, you're doing a lot line adjustment, something like that. So what we did was, as the director pointed out, where the fees are, we could establish a consistency that, on average, the fee takes 20 hours. Those get a flat fee. If there is a wide variation, 2 hours, between 2 hours and 200 hours, then those kinds of projects are going to be charged out on a deposit basis, time and materials. So in that case, I think that's really what you're referring to, those larger, more complex projects. I did not look at individual projects because there's no need to, because it's a deposit-based fee. Someone makes a deposit, and then the revenue stream is going to be dependent upon who charges to that particular project. So the fee really is just the hourly rate on those.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Schmidt mentioned that, there are legal fees and all kinds of other fees that could be applied to this. Transportation, and help me if I've slipped a note here, but transportation is a department, but is it not still under planning? Okay, but I didn't see any rates changes for the transportation fees.
Yeah, that is a separate part of the fee schedule and in a separate part of the municipal code even, I think. But
We did not address transportation fees because most of those fees are either things like parking and the costs of parking that are usually set by council, or there's some fees like the wide load permit that are set by state agency. We really don't have a lot of transportation fees that deal with on an hourly basis.
Except that we do peer review of EIRs and traffic analysis
Oh,
and
those
any
are
number of
folded
things
into
like
these
that.
fees.
yeah, and to the extent that our transportation staff works on these planning entitlements, those hourly rates, and those would be captured here. So we would bill our traffic engineer's time against the environmental review project based on this fee schedule.
Okay, all I noticed here was just planning fees, though.
But, well, if you look at the hourly rates in the back, you'll see there's a project engineer listed, and, I mean, we will capture the time of anyone who works on these deposit projects. So we collect the big deposit, Cara works on an hour, I work on an hour, the traffic engineer works on an hour. We're charging all of that time to the project.
Is the same thing true with Public Works, because you have trees and...
Anyone who's working on that project, we will collect from them.
I think it would be helpful, I don't know about other council members, I'll see what they have to say, but it seems like it would be helpful to kind of indicate that in here somewhere so that we know that we're being comprehensive in our approach. Another question is that early in the staff report it talks about, cost recovery percentage rates, low, medium, and high. And on a number of occasions it talks about 100% cost recovery, but in the other occasions it wasn't clear to me what percentage we were charging. It just didn't say 100%. It just named a fee. So are those low or medium or high but not 100% cost recovery? I could pick out any one here. Legal review appeal to the city council. Well, that's probably not a very good one to use. I just opened it up here. Expansion of existing two-story greater than 100 square feet, that's part of individual review, but it says a fee and then a proposed fee and a proposed fee for 2018. I don't know if that's low, medium, high.
Well, what we meant to communicate is that in the last column, so the highest fee you see there in the right-hand column is what we think full cost recovery would be. And so what we're charging now is well below full cost recovery, and we're proposing to get to full cost recovery over 2 steps, just because it's such a big increase in some cases.
I believe at the bottom of each page there's a little plus sign that indicates if we did not reflect the full cost. And in those cases, I believe we missed one, which was appeals. But other than that, I believe we also had daycare.
Right.
Use permits.
And that one was spelled out.
50%, yes.
That one was spelled out.
The rest of them, if it was a deposit-based fee, we put in a minimal amount for deposit. And if it was a flat fee, it would be the full cost recovery rate.
So what you're saying is everything in this fee schedule is full cost recovery, except for filing for an appeal and daycare. Is that what you're saying?
Missing any others? I believe so.
Okay.
No, those were both.
So if that's the case, I went through every one of these. Believe it or not, I went through every one of these, and I saw something that was kind of like, really. I'm not going to be able to find it quickly here, and then I'll move along here. Wherever it is, I called it at. Here it is. I wouldn't be happy about this. Demolition application for historic buildings. It has been $24.72, and it's going down to $1,001. So does it mean we've been overcharging all this time? And how in the world could it be that low? Because I can't imagine it could be that low, because you'd have to analyze whether the building was, historic or not, if it's on the inventory, if it's retained its character. You'd have to, you have to go to the HRB. I just can't imagine why it would be so low. That's one that went down.
Right, and the reason that went down is what we're capturing here is the staff time in evaluating a request for that request. And in some of those instances, we're likely going to require a historic resources inventory report, which is a professional consultant's report. And so we've captured that under a new section here, dealing with environmental documents or research projects that are required, where we charge an hourly rate to review that HRE and to provide comments. We have a flat fee if it's one that we can look at. We do our in-house analysis. We take it to the board, and we think it's pretty straightforward. That's the fee that's charged here. If it requires more review, a consultant's report, we're going to charge for the cost of that consultant's report plus 25% to account for the staff time in managing that contract.
Thank you for that, and since you mentioned it, I'm both gratified and a bit shocked that we haven't been charging 25% over. Can't imagine any business that hasn't done that for the last umpteen years. So thank you for adding that now. The other thing was a lot of these talk about deleted and moved someplace else, but there's no way to know where else it moved. So it's very hard to track what went where.
I'm sorry, I'm very sorry about that, Councilmember Holman. The idea, one of the things we really were trying to do, and you'll see that a lot in the legal fees, I think that's particularly where you see it, is that in the past, legal fees were separated out as a separate piece, and this gets to your question about when other people are involved besides planning staff. This is we're looking at as an activity and who's involved in the activity. It seemed to make more sense to simplify the fees by putting the legal activities, when they weren't extensive, to actually fold them into the fee where we could quantify how much legal time would be involved pretty easily. We could fold that into the flat fee, which makes it easier for the person who's taking in the application and makes it easier for the applicant to understand the true cost.
I think some of that explanation, and again, we'll see what other people have to say, but I think some of that explanation when it goes to full council would be really helpful, so we don't get the same questions all over again. I think just two more questions before I pass it off. So currently, and this was really like, wow. So current operating budget, we are subsidizing 80% of planning department activities. Understanding that certainly now we're doing the comp plan update and blah, blah, blah. But even after these increases, we're still subsidizing 69%. And it's just stunning. And I think it would be helpful, again, when this goes forward, to have, there's a brief description in here of kind of what kinds of activities we do subsidize, and many of them are reasonable, rational, logical. But the number is so large, the percentage is so large, that I think it's a little bit hard to swallow. So if more meat could be put around that, it would be helpful. And I had one other question, which had to do with code compliance, I believe. I'm glad also I noticed, of course, that these are fully loaded costs, so thank you very much for that. I'm missing my question right now. If it's okay, if you could pass it on and maybe come back.
Very well.
Thank you for your time.
Councilmember Wolbeck.
So first, actually, I just want to say, speaking only for myself, did not share some of the concerns about the clarity with the stuff about, was it moved, deleted, moved somewhere else. More clarity there would probably be useful for full council and the public. But the question of where the money is going for the general fund and the fee funding combining to as just subsidize or pay for the planning department didn't bother me. I mean, we subsidize, you could say, the most of our departments. That's what we do. I was really interested in the first paragraph on page 8 of the staff report, which was page 10 of the packet. And Councilmember Holman was starting to get to this a little bit and talking about daycares. Basically the question is, are there things that we want to encourage or in some way support as a matter of equity or a matter of encouragement, that we want to provide some subsidy to those kinds of activities when they are brought by members of the public, be they a big developer with a project or a homeowner making a change to their house. And so that's an interesting question. So I'm just going to share a couple of kind of framing thoughts about this question, and also my question about how the process works. I guess before I get into this, what do we need to decide tonight regarding this? I mean, if there are any proposals or changes or suggestions, would you need us to highlight each particular line, or if we wanted to give some kind of general guidance on something that we want to, say, encourage or provide some kind of subsidy for, staff could maybe go back and and figure out the details of where that all falls, and then bring that back. Is that how this would work tonight? I want to make sure that I'm just following a smart process that's respectful of colleagues and staff.
Yeah, well, I guess we'd be open to the council members' input on this. We have to notice this as a public hearing in the city council when we have an ordinance. So our thought was any input you could give us tonight would help us draft the ordinance and prepare it for council. If there are specific, you can be as specific as you want to be. If there are specific things you want us to bring back before we go through that next step, we can do that too. Our goal is, though, to get an ordinance adopted by the council in enough time that it can take effect at the first of the fiscal year.
Okay, and first of the fiscal year, the date would be
July 1st.
July 1st, of course,
July 1,
right?
so-
July 1.
And it takes 60 days to take effect. so-
Right. And so what we might do is, just thinking about if there are, I'll get into some of my thinking, brainstorming about this in a minute, but if there are things that we want to provide some kind of either an incentive or or for equity's sake, some kind of subsidy, we might want to have that maybe take place the following fiscal year rather than the coming fiscal year, is because we're looking at 17 and 18 that you're proposing here, correct?
Right. I should say too, we do have, separate from our fee schedule, we instituted within the last couple of years a fee waiver policy that lets the city manager waive fees for nonprofits in certain circumstances. I don't remember exactly what the policy says, but that's the situation where if, for example, we had a nonprofit affordable housing developer that was proposing to develop affordable housing.
How did you know where I was going with this?
Yeah, we do have the ability to offer incentives in terms of waived fees in cases like that, and that's not in this section of the fee schedule, but it is in the city's fee schedule.
It's in the municipal fees.
Could I just add a comment to what Corey had brought up?
As long as I get
Daycare
the
center
second.
was mentioned specifically, and the only mention of daycare in the fee is a 900% increase in fee for use permit. That stands out.
What page is that of the packet?
Back at page 19, first item.
Oh, yeah, yep. Yeah, I'd circled that. So I'll just put out a couple of thoughts for my colleagues. Did you have something else that you wanted to add? Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I believe the reason daycare center was called out was because his institutional memory is that daycare had been subsidized in the past, and that the amount that's in there, you may note that's one of them that's not at full cost recovery. That's actually 50% of the full cost recovery.
Okay. So I guess just a couple of framing thoughts for how we think about whether we want to push anything here or do it in the fee waiver policy separately. First, obviously, we are the finance committee, so of course we want to be financially prudent, especially considering overburden of staff and an overburdened department in particular. So that's kind of the first, rule element to keep in mind for me. Another is fairness. That developers should be paying their fair share, but at the same time, residents, for the most part, I don't want to see us milking residents because they're doing something on their own property that's within our code, that's within what we allow. But then there's also the policy considerations of, as I was saying before, discouraging or encouraging something. Basically being, to a degree, maybe not quite punitive, but saying, we're going to do full cost recovery on this, but cutting it down for something else, whether it's daycares or a seniors center or school, BMR housing, or whether it's multifamily housing that includes a substantial chunk or is completely below market rate, or I know that our Planning Transportation Commission just started conversations about accessory dwelling units, which are called out in our housing element and our own comp plan. And if somebody wanted to add a secondary dwelling unit and list it as a BMR unit, which is one of the questions that Planning Commission brought up recently, would we want to reduce the fees for that, or is that something we want to tackle later for future year discussion, fee waiver policy. You know, a lot of these questions I'm kind of putting out, expecting that we're not going to act on them now, but I wanted to at least float the concepts and the consideration for us to think about on, you know, on the committee and also for staff. You know, that my guess is, you know, office developments we're probably not enthusiastic about. I'm just guessing we're not going to be enthusiastic about subsidizing the fees for something that's you know, residential, especially again residential with BMR units or residential with a little bit of retail. We might be interested in exploring that at some point. But again, you know, we don't necessarily need to act on those tonight. But I just put those out there, I guess, as policy considerations for everyone to think about, and I leave it open for thoughts on how we best proceed or whether we come back to that either at a later date or in a later year.
Okay. Are you getting
Yeah,
more?
that's it. Yeah.
Thank you
Well, actually,
very
let me say just one more framing thing about that, which is, you know, obviously, you know, planning commission is dealing with SDUs. We're working on our comprehensive plan, and so I guess part of the question is, how does our consideration of these fees, as they relate, you know, the policy implications of these fees, relate to those other discussions about ordinances and the comprehensive plan? And maybe it's better to wait and see what comes out of the comp plan, planning commission, et cetera, and then use that to inform future discussions about fees. You know, if the comp plan says, you know, we really, really want to push X, really want to encourage X, then maybe next time we have this discussion, we say, okay, we've settled on our comp plan, and the comp plan says we want to push this. Let's subsidize this a little bit more. And I do appreciate the call out in the report that staff would like to see us do this on a more regular basis. I think that's useful, so we can have a more agile system. So, thanks.
Thank you. So
Through the chair, if I could just
Yes,
chime
please.
in on one issue there. This issue of sort of the relationship between comp plan and fee levels comes up a lot in connection with development of housing and in the housing element. And so there's actually an exercise that we go through with our housing element is we look at whether the fees that we charge for housing processing is actually serving as a constraint to development of housing. And so that's a very logical nexus, and it is built into our process. And so if that's, you know, if it's found that the fees are too high and serving as a constraint, you will typically see housing element policies that say, look at, you know, the fees
Can
in
I
more
ask,
detail.
can I ask a follow-up question
Yeah.
to that? Does this reflect consideration of the housing element discussion about that issue? Was that taken into consideration in putting this together?
I don't believe that the current fee levels, which are, you know, obviously very subsidized, served as a constraint in this housing element cycle. So it was not identified as a constraint. If we increase the fees, then we would go through that analysis again in the housing element, and, you know, there might be a different finding.
Right. So I guess all I would say at this point then is, you know, and if it needs to be included when we do a motion tonight, that if the proposed fee schedule for 17 and 18 are likely to serve as a constraint on housing, then we would want to subsidize those fees. Thanks.
Okay. So I have a few questions. First, let me ask a question. So if I understand the process here, the protocol we're talking about is that there would be a major review of fees, fee structure each 3 to 5 years, but then an annual adjustment where we estimate the change in wage and benefits to adjust the fees. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next question, so if I read this correctly, essentially what we're saying is the current level of recovery is below 100%. And if we increase the recovery, most of these to 100%, right, in this document, the gap is about $900,000. Is that right? And we would be doing that over 2 years.
That's right.
So if we did it all in the first year, right, the difference between doing it all in the first year versus doing it in 2 years costs the city about $450,000. Is that essentially correct?
That's all right.
Do you have an estimate for how much of the $900,000 is commercial versus residential fees? Have we looked at that?
I don't think we do. We'd have to look at, I don't even really know how we do that. I guess we'd have to go back and look at a sample year and see how many, ARB applications we got that were mixed use versus commercial, wholly commercial, and how many IRs we did. I mean, it would be.
Dan, have you got any impression of that?
I think Hillary's point is very accurate. There would be, you basically have to go back through all of the documentation on every project to say, okay, was this commercial, was it residential, was it multifamily? We could probably back into it. It would be an estimate. I'm thinking, Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, could go through the list of fees and say, well, this one is predominantly commercial.
Right.
This one is predominantly residential. But that would be probably a pretty rough estimate, but it would be something.
Yeah, so I understand these, because surely stuff that goes to the ARB a few times tends to be commercial, right, as opposed to, not everything, but, right, or mixed use.
Yeah, and that's what we'd be looking at. Well, does this one tend to be commercial, or does it tend to be residential?
Because I guess the inclination is to say if it's mostly commercial, then you feel one way about sort of the time frame of phasing it in, because it's a business expense, right? And the amount of money involved in these things is pretty much larger than all these fees, right? As opposed to residential, you might look at it slightly differently.
Yeah, one thing I should say too, I think this is right, that we're proposing these, this big increase in hourly rates.
Yeah.
And one thing that it would be possible to do is go right to the top on the hourly rates, but phase in the flat fees.
What
Because
impact would that make?
it just means that the bigger projects
Oh, I see. Right.
that we charge
Deposit
hourly
based,
to
right.
would be paying 100% right
Right.
away, whereas
Right.
the smaller projects, the flat fees, you'd phase them in over 2 years. That's just a possible compromise.
From my perspective, that would be, I think, a very accurate way of getting to your point, because those deposit-based fees, Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, the deposit-based fees more than likely are going to be commercial.
Right.
Yeah.
So then what you would say would be, the approach to that would say, raise the hourly fees in year one, or in year one, and the flat fees phase in over 2 years. Is that
Right.
essentially what we're saying? Okay.
Deposits and hourly.
Of course, you'd like that to be a net plus to the city versus just doing the 50/50, right, as written. Right? But presumably it would be because you'd be going after, because you'd be dealing with big projects.
You make it 75, 25,
Or actually, you could take the flat fees and do them over two. Actually, that's what we're saying, right? Take the flat fees and do them over 2 years, and the hourly fees and do them over 1 year.
Right.
So that would be ahead. Okay.
Right.
And I assume increase the corresponding deposits.
Yeah, and the deposits would go up too, yeah.
So that seems like something we should consider.
Could I ask a follow-up?
Yes, please.
We have an aging population and we have an aging housing stock. Would this dramatic increase in fees do anything to discourage the updating of that housing stock?
Well, we charge fees for IRs, so if someone replaces existing home with a 2-story home, and we charge planning fees for architectural review, but just remodels of existing homes or tearing down and replacing an existing home? I mean, I don't think that's implicated here, is it?
No, I mean, the IR fees, or the individual review fees are going up, as you can see. And yeah, that's, it is a big increase. And when you look at the overall expense of demolishing a home and building a new home, it's modest, I think, compared to the cost of, building the new house.
Yeah, I guess it's a little upsetting that you can't answer that question of what share of your current fees or the new fees would be residential as opposed to commercial. I guess I had assumed that a lion's share would be commercial.
I believe that's true.
I think that's accurate, but as you know, we get a lot of A or B applications that are mixed use, some that are purely commercial. We'd have to go in and dissect every application to determine what share is residential versus commercial.
I would just guess, though, that in this city in the last few years, mixed use, I mean, it varies from city to city, but in Palo Alto, mixed use has been dominated by commercial space, right? So I would
Yes.
assume that the
And
dynamics aren't that much different.
That's right. And I think it changes over time, but you're right, in the last several years, probably we've seen mostly commercial development when you look at those big fees, the A or B fees.
Actually, that was actually my next question, right, which was, what triggers an individual review? I mean, does a kitchen remodel trigger individual review? Or
Two-story home,
Two-story, adding a story.
adding a second story.
So adding a.
For 150 square feet.
Adding to a second story more than 150
So
square
if I
feet.
add another bedroom on the ground floor of my house, does
You're
that
fine.
trigger?
Yeah.
So adding a second story, right, or a tear down and remodel. Okay.
That's right.
And we have 70 of those a year or something like that. Okay.
So if you do the number on that, as I did, based on 2,500 as opposed to the 2,800 as a fee, it's $150,000 roughly of that 900,000. So it's on the lower side of that.
Here's IR. I'm sorry, which page was the IR on? I just want to follow.
Yeah, the IR is.
I just want to get what page we were on.
I don't have the packet page number, but it's the
It's back page 15.
top of the page.
Got it. Thank you very much.
So my next question I wanted to ask, which is, when we look on packet page 9, you sort of compare us to other municipalities. And if you look at Beverly Hills, okay, their hourly rates charged to the public are between $400 and $500 an hour, which is prime consulting, junior partner legal kind of wage. How do they do that and not run afoul of Prop 218?
Well, Dan's here.
Since I've done both, I could speak to that. Beverly Hills, I'll give you one example of what is included in that hourly rate that's not included in this hourly rate. Code enforcement. We had a conversation about how do we allocate the cost of code enforcement. Should it be allocated? Should it not be allocated? Should all of it be allocated? Should a portion of it be allocated or none of it? Beverly Hills took the, in my experience, somewhat unusual approach of saying, we're going to recover all of the cost of code enforcement. So part of that hourly rate that you see for Beverly Hills is, in fact, a small component piece for code enforcement. In this case, we did not include anything for code enforcement. And that's just an example. There are several other examples of activities that go into those hourly rates for Beverly Hills.
You know what I'm about to ask.
Yeah.
Should we?
Well, I'll tell you our thought process, and then Cara probably wants to weigh in. I mean, you really have to be able to make a good case that the activity is related to the service that's being provided, for which the fee is being charged. I think it's possible to say that there is some little bit of code enforcement that's related to that an applicant benefits from. But our assessment was that to fully subsidize the whole program with fees and make the applicants pay for that was not appropriate. And I don't know if Carl wants to add.
I agree with that.
Okay.
So can I just follow up to that?
Yes, please.
So, Palo Alto tends to be, I'll get myself in trouble again here, we tend to be rather loath, though, to charge penalties. So we're not capturing those. So is there another way we could do this, or is there should we be charging, is there another way we can do it? We either need to like enhance our interest and incentive within the city to charge fines for people who aren't code compliant, or do something like this. I'm not suggesting we do that, but and the public would be thrilled if we would do something that would actually incentivize people to bring whatever issues into code compliance.
Yes, thank you. So, absolutely, you can do that. So what we do is we update our administrative penalty schedule once a year.
Mm-hmm.
And that, is the time to examine that issue. Of course, if you want to bring it up, at off cycles, we can also take a look at it. One of the things that we have clarified, I believe this year, with our administrative penalty schedule is that the continuing enforcement problems are going to be charged on a daily basis. It was not the case a few years ago. It was just a single occurrence, one single fine of $200. But if that enforcement problem continues, then we do now, under our new administrative penalty schedule, have the ability to charge daily fines. So that's a good thing. I know that staff was also looking at, enhancements to penalties in connection with the PC process.
Mm-hmm.
So, those efforts certainly are underway.
So you're saying then, am I learning here that the PCs that are out there that are non-compliant are going to start getting penalized on a daily basis if they don't come into compliance within a number of days? And how's that, I'm sorry for a little bit of a digression here, but this is of interest to a lot of people. How is it going to be collected, assessed and collected?
Right. So I didn't mean to imply that we are making an active change to our PC penalty process, right now. The existing schedule, though, does allow a daily penalty. So, for instance, with Edgewood, again, this is getting a little off topic, but the Edgewood Plaza grocery store, which is under a obligation to provide a community benefit, that is being assessed now on a daily rate basis. Mm-hmm. So there is that ability to do that. What I was referring to is that I think there was some further discussion about how to assess PC penalties, such as creating an escrow account and charging for the enforcement costs and all of that. And that was going to be studied in connection with PC reform in general. And that process has sort of been put on hold now with our PC moratorium.
But non-PC code enforcement?
So yes, that's you can evaluate that when our annual penalty schedule comes up for review.
Okay. I got a note. Maybe we should.
But again,
we are starting to get off topic here.
A little bit.
But
it's just so interesting to us.
Yeah, I hear you.
So
I
how
have
we
I
collect
have a
it.
suggestion on.
Yeah.
Maybe we can bring it up later when we start talking about future agenda items, because that's one of the things we're
good.
doing later.
Thank you.
So I've made a note of it here. Right. And I sort of had one more question, which is, you said earlier that the study accounted for wages and benefits, but not things like sick leave, vacation expense, and other things like that. And why not? Or was the sense that would be
Would you like
a
me
lot
to
of work for a
respond to
very
that?
small, very small difference? Yeah.
Okay, actually, it does account for sick leave.
Oh, okay.
The way I do the calculations is, at some point it comes down to what's the productive hourly rate,
Right.
and then what's the productive hours. So in calculating productive hours, we start out with a standard 2,080. We subtract out vacation time, paid holiday time, sick leave, the full account of sick leave, training, routine meetings. So all of that then gets built into the hourly rate.
Good. But I assume, Lala's going to cringe when I pick up my chart here again. Right? I assume one thing it doesn't cover is that we don't recover the cost for is the growth in the unfunded public pension and OPEB liability, which we have now, which is $500 million, growing 15 to 20% a year.
It would only, the calculation would use what we input in terms of the projected rate that we get from CalPERS for the employer side. So it would only cover that portion of it.
Right, which is the funded portion, not the unfunded portion.
Yes, it assumes that eventually you'll deal with the unfunded over a period of time, but as you know, there's many variables.
So maybe for the future agenda items, we could talk about that. Okay. So just in general, I'm going to make a comment here. We sort of have a discussion of subsidizing things and the costs of these kind of services. There are a couple of components. One is the amount of time it takes, right? And what that time costs us. And the other, there's been some discussion, and Mr. McFall brought up, what about the efficiency of our processes in doing this, right? So I think it's not possible for us as the Finance Committee to dig into the efficiencies of our processes for doing things. I think we got to look at what our costs are, and that's what they are, right? With regard to subsidies and exemptions and so forth, the costs are what they are. And so if the applicant doesn't pay for them, then somebody else got to pay for them, right? And that is going to end up, because it comes from the general fund, being basically the residents of the city who pay, what's our number, 72 or 73% to be refined in the comp plan finance discussion
Next week.
of the cost of running the city. So I think that we should, in general, keep this process as simple as possible, shoot for 100% cost recovery on almost everything, right? Rather than trying to build a patchwork smorgasbord of exemptions. We have a couple in here that are worthy things, daycare centers and so forth. I think affordable housing potentially is one of them, right? Although we don't build a lot of affordable housing projects per year in the city, right? And so if there's things that are very few, right, we're not doing lots and lots of them, it may be that the fee waiver process is just much more efficient to do it. So I think we should consider that. So that would be my hope, is that we'll maintain the simplicity. I do like the idea of accelerating faster than 2 years, that go into 100% cost recovery for big commercial projects, right? The cost of doing business, and again, somebody's got to pay for it, right? And if the applicant doesn't pay for it, then people paying their mortgage got to pay for it. Okay. Motions?
I thought you were sounding like you were just making one.
If somebody else wants to, I'll make one, or if somebody else wants to make one, and maybe I will make one. Move to accept the staff recommendation, with the addition that the hourly fees will go to 100% in year one, and the flat fees will go to 100% on the 2-year schedule.
I'll second that.
And I think I've spoken enough to my motion already. Councilmember Holmes?
No, it's, that was on my list to actually ask. It was one of the couple of questions I didn't ask earlier, was the tiering. And I guess my question, I do support that, but I have a question about it. And that is, Well, there aren't that many flat fees, really. Do we have any notion, can anybody do a quick back of the envelope, like how much difference it is? One of you two accounting guys?
I saw it in here somewhere, there's a list of sort of the number of flat fees versus.
Oh, the number that you want the dollar amount?
Oh, it's dollar amount.
Yeah.
If that's reasonable to try to ascertain. Maybe it's not. Because as Eric said, which I fully support, like somebody's got to pay for it.
16.
And
Yeah.
it is appearing like 2016 for fiscal 2017 may be a lean year for the city.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I do support the motion. Again, there are some things that I asked for earlier. It'd be great to have by the time this goes to the council. That would be one of those items, if you would agree to that. It doesn't need to be in the motion, but if you could agree that that's a number that should be presented to the council.
Can you state again exactly what you're suggesting?
The fee-based projects, tiering them in, how much we aren't capturing in the first year versus what we would be capturing if we did it all at once.
Is that acceptable to staff?
So we would analyze the revenue that would come from the flat fees in year 2.
Right.
So, okay, yeah.
And compare that to
Sure.
what we'd be getting in year 1.
I'd be interested in that. I think that would be a useful number. I don't want to burden the staff with too much work, that's the trouble.
Okay. I support that, and I have another comment, but I think we should deal with the motion first.
Okay. Councilmember Schmidt.
I'd like to add an amendment. The understanding from our discussion tonight was clearly that the dramatic increase in fees would not be have a huge impact on residential. So I think that should be stated clearly in the report going to council, that either show the estimated share of new fees that would be paid by residents, or have a clear statement that the maintenance and upgrading of existing housing units will not be affected. Is that acceptable?
So, with respect to calculating the actual impact, I think what I heard was that would require, a great deal of work to go back and track down all these numbers, right?
I think
Did I understand that right?
Yes, although if Councilmember Schmidt is looking for something like in the whereases of the ordinance, I think we can include a statement as you just indicated, which is the maintenance of existing residences
Is expected to be minimally impacted. or
would not
something
be
like that.
affected by these fee
Okay.
changes. So,
Yeah, I think that's the assumption we're making in approving this.
Yep.
right.
And just to have it clearly stated, I would help all of the
Right.
council.
Okay.
Can I get clarification? So what you're saying is that maintenance of existing residential would, because it's not going to be affected by this anyway, I guess I need
Well,
more
it's
clarification.
the rebuilding, it's the updating of the existing residential housing stock.
I wouldn't support that. I wouldn't support that because I don't think, housing stock is a large topic. I think, Chair Phils has said it well, that, the city manager can use the waiver fee for affordable housing projects, which I'm certainly very supportive of.
Not asking for any waiver fee.
You're talking
Yeah, I know
people with
you're not.
existing single-family homes that want to remodel their bathroom or something like that.
Well, or that need a rebuilding of the, center structure or the outer walls. We have an aging housing stock that needs maintenance. And they need to get approval of, permitting.
But if I understand
But
what I
if you
heard
just-
here, most of those will not trigger an
And
IR.
that's what I would like to have a clear statement.
Well, IR regulations are clearly stated already in the code. IR is demolition and construction of a new
Okay,
two-story home.
I'm just a simple council member, and I had lots of questions after reading this. And so it would be helpful to ask the full council to have, that statement clearly put.
I am sorry, but I think that the scope of the question or the topic is so broad that I'm not quite sure what it would cover and what it wouldn't cover, what your intention was.
Well, we had a statement that about, 15% of the current activity of the department would be on the residential request as opposed to commercial.
And is it
request.
single family or multifamily or both?
Single family. So IRs apply just to single family. And, just doing the back of the page, and for somebody who's not even mathematically inclined, I, just running the numbers, 2,500 times 70 applications, that's about, $150,000. Somebody will check me if I got that right. And we're talking about a $900,000 increase over time. So each individual applicant who's coming in to, if they want to tear down their home and build a new home, the net increase that they're going to be affected by these fees at most would be the difference between the 2.8 that we charge now, the 2,800 that we charge now, up to the 5,600 that we will be charging in 2018. So yes, it's about a doubling almost of the fee, and I don't want to minimize that.
But
That's a lot of
presumably
money.
The majority of people are
But
tearing
in
down a
scope
bungalow
of-
and putting up a
Exactly.
mansion.
We may have some people here who can speak to the overall costs of building a home. So it'd certainly be a lot for me, but I think it's
So here's why I wouldn't support it is, I don't want to subsidize, and I don't want to ask other people to subsidize that not that large of amount of money compared to the cost of a new house. And if somebody's going to build a new house, they can absolutely afford that very small increment of money. I don't want to ask my neighbors to subsidize somebody down the block rebuilding a house.
And if I may, as I'm understanding.
And the consultant is nodding his head in agreement.
As I'm understanding the comment, it's not that anything about this would be subsidizing redevelopment of a home, just that if you choose to redevelop your home, you're not going to be negatively impacted by the fees that are being proposed to be introduced here. No subsidies, just.
Well, except if we're not collecting it, somebody's paying it.
Well, the applicant's paying for it. The applicant's paying for it, but it's a
It's a
modest
small
increase in fees.
share of what we're approving.
Yeah.
No. I want second, sorry.
That's 100% cost recovery, yeah.
Care proposes an unfriendly amendment.
Yeah.
Do you want to restate it? No promises, but just want to make sure I was really clear about it.
Just that the report to council clearly state that the share of the fee increase will not have a negative impact on the maintenance of our existing housing stock.
Will not have or is not expected to have.
Will not have a dramatic negative impact on the maintenance of our existing housing stock.
Right, but is that explanatory or is that policy direction? I guess is kind of the question I think that the chair was trying to get to. Are we just trying to clarify the report, or are we establishing a little
It
bit on
is,
how much
well,
impact it
from
can have?
my perspective, it is the assumption I am making in voting in favor of this.
And does that include single family and multifamily, or just single family?
Well, both, if you want to focus on single family, that would be fine. It's dealing with an aging housing stock. That when you need to put in new supports, new walls, new roof, whatever it is, that we are not, this vote will not have a negative impact.
This is going to come to council, right?
Yeah, and this is just to help council.
Action or consent to
Deal with
council?
It's going to be a public hearing, actually.
Mm-hmm. Just its fees.
So I'm not going to second.
I will.
Care
Okay.
to speak to your amendment?
Well, I think when we talk about housing, in Palo Alto, we're talking about an aging housing stock where the average age has gone up dramatically over the last few decades. And that means a lot of rebuilding, either parts, central structural parts of the house or houses themselves. And these fee increases we're voting on are quite dramatic. And I think the understanding in our discussion was that the fees would primarily hit large new commercial developments as opposed to maintenance of the existing housing stock. And just to put that assumption clearly in the report to the council would be helpful.
Care to speak to your second?
I think he said it well.
I think I will not vote in favor of the amendment. I think, given what we're talking about, I think an appropriate mechanism would be for you to bring it up at the council meeting and the staff to respond to the whole council, and I think therefore it's not necessary in the motion itself, and I prefer simple motions. Other comments? Vote on the amendment. All in favor? All opposed? Motion fails.
Okay?
Any further discussion on the main motion?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Couple questions. So going back to some of the things I was discussing earlier, I want to get just a little bit more clarity about this fee waiver policy. My first question, right, I guess my central question about the fee waiver policy, is this something where there are standing, because I'm thinking about whether I want to offer an amendment tonight or when it comes to council or reserve my thoughts for the fee waiver policy. Is that something that is always case by case and up to the city manager's discretion, or is it something where council can set standing orders so that we're telling the city manager you should always grant a fee waiver for X?
I'm happy to read the fee waiver policy to you. It was enacted as part of last year's budget, I think. It says that the recommendation of the Planning and Community Environment Director, the city manager may waive all or a portion of a planning fee when the applicant is a nonprofit organization or another governmental entity. And the following findings can be made. 1, the proposed project would advance a public purpose benefiting the residents of Palo Alto. And 2, general fund support is available to backfill the fees waived. The city manager will report annually to the city council about fee waivers granted pursuant to this provision as part of the closing of the budget.
Okay, so that sounds like it's pretty limited in scope. I don't think that that's broad enough to address my core concern, which goes to this issue of whether our fees provide a disincentive to the housing stock, whether it is repair of existing stock and preservation of existing stock. There's concern that we may lose stock at times, or the construction of new housing stock in accordance with our comprehensive plan, our housing element, and our city regulations. So I guess I would actually offer an amendment, which I don't want to jinx it, but I think will probably be unsuccessful, as the last one was.
We're all friends here. Go for it.
But I want, again, part of my purpose is to at least put it out there for discussion. Perhaps it'll come up again in front of the full council, or we'll find another way or another time to address it. But I would like to offer a friendly amendment that we direct staff to study whether any fees provide a substantial disincentive to housing preservation and construction, or preservation or construction, as warned of in our housing element of our comprehensive plan, and if so, to subsidize such fees as relevant.
All housing. Because that's what we're talking about here is housing and commercial, that's it.
Right, that's for housing. I can't remember which section it is, but yes, as Cara pointed out, there's a. Well, let me, before I speak to it, we'll see if there's a second.
Could you restate it?
Yeah. Let me make sure I got it right. Or did the city clerk type it?
I have some. Direct staff to study any fees, provide a substantial disincentive to housing preservation or construction in the housing element, and if so, to subsidize such fees as relevant.
As warned of in the housing element.
Okay?
And to recommend to council, actually that's why I should have added, to recommend to council, or to provide for council, yeah, how about this? To provide for council an optional subsidy to prevent such disincentive. So basically, yeah, basically it would come
How does
back
that
to
differ
council.
from the existing housing element?
You're proposing to waive all fees on housing projects.
Only if it is identified as being a substantial. So this is something we'll leave to staff to figure out. Only if it provides a substantial disincentive. If it's modest, as has been argued, a lot of these are modest and insignificant compared to the total cost of housing. In those cases, there would be no waiver. This is something that our housing element warns of, is that there may be things in our policy which provide a disincentive to producing the housing that that we have to. And if this motion would say, staff should look at if these fees have that kind of effect, and if they do, when this comes to council, say, here's how you could subsidize these fees in order to prevent that disincentive.
Yeah, I guess my feeling is the housing element will be coming to the council in a couple of weeks, and there's language in the housing element directed to this. Is that correct?
Yeah, the housing element contains an analysis of this issue and the existing fee schedule as it relates to this issue. And I haven't read that section in a long time, but I believe it concludes that the cost of land in Palo Alto is far and away, the greatest constraint on new housing and the availability of land. So the fees that we charge pale by comparison to these other constraints that we really have nothing to do with.
So essentially you think that it's not necessary to do such an analysis because we've already done it and concluded that this is insignificant?
I think so, but this fee waiver policy kind of grew out of the housing element, because in the housing element we talked about the need to potentially waive fees for nonprofit, for affordable housing development, 100% affordable projects. And so we proposed this fee waiver policy that the council adopted, and that gives us the ability where we have a affordable housing project that's really that's being built as affordable housing. It's not a market rate project that has a couple affordable units in it, that we have the ability to waive the fees for that particular project.
Right, but that's only, as I heard you read it, that existing waiver policy only applies to something being built either by a nonprofit or by government, and which is fully affordable. So it would not apply to, say, let's say a for-profit developer said, I want to build something and half of it's going to be BMR housing, which is almost impossible to ever get, right? But if they said they wanted to do that, the city manager would not even be able to provide a fee waiver in that special and very unlikely unicorn kind of case.
That's correct. In that case,
because it's so limited.
For-profit developer presumably is making enough of a profit that they could pay our fees, which are, again, a nominal part of the total cost of land and construction.
Still looking for a second.
Yeah, I guess I feel that the opportunity to bring this up in the housing element to say, let's change the wording in the housing element
well, I guess I'll just, if I could just respond to that, that the housing element doesn't have the legislative action. It warns of a problem, and I'm just trying to make sure we take action to prevent that problem. Sounds like Director of Planning and Community Environment thinks that this is fairly confident that this is not a problem.
I think the motion fails on account of lack of a second.
That is fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks
For what it's
for
worth, I
engaging
think
the conversation.
it seems to me like a very, all this stuff, first of all, I think we're talking about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, because, this is such a tiny fraction of the cost of building everything. But also, I think we should think very differently, we're getting off of finance, very differently about affordable housing versus vast amounts of market
Right.
rate housing. So I think to try to, put one thing that covers all those cases is, that's challenging. Okay,
I was
further
going to
dis-
say something similar to that, which is not all housing is created equally.
Yeah, thank you.
And if there was some way, and I appreciate your nod to
Can-
that.
Can I,
Oh, sorry.
can we make sure this is on the finance as opposed to seg? We could talk about housing and affordable housing for a long time.
I was just going to acknowledge what Corey said about, Councilman Wilbach said about existing housing and retention of it. So just wanted to acknowledge that.
So acknowledged. So, motion, can you read back the motion?
Sure. Let me scroll up real quick. So we have a motion by Chair Felseth, seconded by Councilmember Holman, to recommend the City Council adopt the schedule for planning fee increases and adjustments in hourly rates to better reflect the city's user fee cost recovery level policy, with the addition that the hourly fees will go to 100% in year one and flat fees will go to 100% in a two-year schedule. And there were two amendments. Well, one amendment which failed, and then the second did not receive a second.
Okay. Motion on the floor, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember.
Thank you.
So before we leave, so
Yep.
I had a question about the report. Can we do that?
Go ahead.
So on the report on page 9, it's general observations of planning, community, environment. And it talks about, I just want to get staff's responses about the splitting off of planning from development services, and also about the splitting of code enforcement and code compliance. And I just wanted to see if staff had some comments they wanted to make about this. Because there were kind of striking comments.
Yeah, I know we saw this in Dan's report, and I hope it came through in our summary that Development Services is undertaking their own fee study this year, and I think they're going to be able to look at some of these issues and give the Lalo and others a recommendation on whether this restructuring is the right way to go or not. So I can't say anything further about it right now, but we'll continue to look at this issue.
So is it just the, and maybe it's a question for Dan too, if it is, feel free to respond. It wasn't clear to me quite if it's just a funding issue, if it was also a structural issue.
Could you ask that question again?
So the challenges that are spelled out in the report, again, on your report on page 9.
My report, okay.
Yeah. Are they challenges because of how the fees are collected and charged and collected? Or is it also a structural aspect of how development and planning have been split off from each other? Is it one or the other or both?
Well, that's a good question.
That's what I was trying to ascertain from this.
Yeah, the challenge that I see is that you've had a large organization that's now split into two, both of which are very complex. And so what I'm seeing over on the development services side is just that there's, and some of it is staffing, and then the split funding of staffing, and where people actually are working versus maybe where they thought they were working when the split was made. I would call that structural, and what I'm seeing is that that's getting worked out. that makes it difficult both on the management side, but also on looking at what an individual service should cost. But I see it more of a structural thing that's getting worked out in an evolutionary fashion.
Okay, that's helpful.
Does that
And does that
Yeah.
reflect what you're
I mean,
thinking is to?
We, on an annual basis, as we prepare our budget, we work with OMB and Development Services to make sure that the revenues and costs between Development Services and PC are split appropriately. Obviously, revenues and costs need to be in the same place. So you can split them one way or split them the other, but every year we go through this process of making sure that they're matching up. And as the Development Services undertakes their fee study, it will be an opportunity to relook at this issue of whether you split people or split fees, so revenues. So we can look at that again.
Okay, all right, great. And then one last question about the fees themselves is, so are other council members okay with, like, I'd ask for some things to be clarified when it comes to council? You know, like where some things have gone. And about, and probably this should have been asked before the motion, but I was...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I know.
please expedite.
I will. About on packet page 19, for instance, where the wireless facilities, it just says delete and delete and delete and delete, and it's not clear where they went. Or
So, yeah, I
so,
can go
so
finish that.
you don't have to answer them even tonight, but just if you could clarify again when it comes to council.
Yeah, I mean, and just in a nutshell, it's consolidating these fees. Instead of having a whole bunch of use permit fees identified, I mean, it's the same function, it's the same process, the same staff work, whether it's a CUP for one thing or the other thing. It just, so we're just collapsing all the fees into one general category. But we'll explain that in the report.
Okay. And then we're going to do future agendas.
If we're done with this, then I think we can thank the planning department for, planning staff for joining us. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
And talk about agendas.
Thank you, Chair. That's it. We have a meeting next on March 1st. Is just to remind the committee, I think most of you know, it's the first and third Tuesday of the month. At the moment, the Muni Code states that your meeting starts at 7.
Yep.
We have to start at 7 again on the 1st because you have a closed session now, as I've been told. And so there's a desire to have enough time for the closed session discussion. So there's a request to keep it at 7. What staff would like to check with you, Chair, and the rest of the committee is if there would be an interest to start the meetings at 6 o'clock.
So let me ask a question. My understanding is that several of us could do 6, but you have a conflict
On the third
on the
Tuesday.
third Tuesday of each month. And Commissioners, I mean, are you a 6 or 7? Do you have a preference?
I would defer to staff's preference.
Sir?
I would prefer 6 o'clock after a long Monday.
So let me ask this. Given that Councilmember Holman's not available at 6 on the third Tuesday, it seems to me we should either leave them all at 7, or we could have the first Tuesday at 6 and the second Tuesday at 7. But is that too complicated for people?
Not for us. We'll take half.
All right.
Can I ask?
What do you, please?
So I take it that staff has a preference for 6 o'clock where possible?
It's usually easier for us because then we can have a quick dinner and get ready to
They'd
go
like,
right to
they'd
the
like
meeting.
3.
Yeah.
Do you need a motion?
It's up to the Chair.
You and I set the agenda, so why don't we set it for 6 on the first Tuesday of the month and 7 on the third Tuesday of the month?
Very well. So if we're good with that discussion, the agenda that we have tentatively for the first is the mid-year. So we have revision to our budget numbers in terms of expenses and revenues, and we'll bring that to you. We also have the much anticipated draft of the comprehensive plan update for the fiscal impact study. And then the beginning of the discussions for the preliminary financial forecast for all utility funds. Let's see, Hillary, is there an update on the fiscal?
No, I was just wondering if there's a meeting before March 1st, because we have that housing impact fee item heading.
I have one listed here for the 16th.
216, yeah.
216.
We have the impact fees coming on the 16th and the fiscal study on the 1st.
Thank you for that. I skipped 216, my oversight. We have the, write down the tentative agenda, power purchase agreements for the Hectate Energy, Palo Alto LLC, the clean program update and extension, and the housing and commercial linkage fee nexus study. So we could flip those if you wanted, Hillary. So we can work on.
Up to the committee, I mean, you thought user fees were fun. Housing impact fees, really.
You got any opinions on those? Sorry, nothing.
I'll save them for the 16th. Probably got plenty.
It'll be a fun night. Okay, so why don't we leave that?
Leave it as
Leave
is.
it as.
Okay.
Actually, it's the 16th, so that needs to be at 7 o'clock.
Yes.
The third Tuesday of the month. And then I'm sorry, can you repeat what was on the first? You got the comp plan fiscal, the Schmidt report.
Yeah. Right? The mid-year.
Right, the mid-year, right?
And then the preliminary financial forecast for all utility funds. And so this is when the discussion starts telling you what they're projecting for the funds and potential rate impacts.
Got it. And that's at 6.
I'm sorry, I think that's...
Oh, is that at 7 p.m. as well?
Yeah.
That's the closed session.
Yeah, I'll double check.
Okay.
Let me see here, my schedule.
And we're going to have the consultants on the
Where's the utilities one?
It's on the first. It's not listed. He's adding.
Oh,
The closed session on the 16th. Okay, I think, yeah, the closed session was on the 16th, so I think we're fine. I skipped one meeting, so the first can be at 6 o'clock.
6 p.m., okay. Okay, and then the 15th, we're talking about the Public Works pool vehicles.
That's correct. And now when we go to 7.
That'll be a fun one.
Okay. The other thing that I wanted to give you tonight...
It's too bad Greg's not here.
And I know some of you were here really late, but it's mostly blank. Let's see, make sure there's 4 of you here. It's the May budget hearing calendars.
Okay.
So what we're looking for is for you to take a look at the schedule, and if you don't mind, share coordinating any absence to those potential dates. So just to remind you, we try to have a meeting on a Monday and Tuesday for the 3-week period, have a wrap-up meeting, and then take it to the council in two nights. Typically what's required is that as long as we have a quorum, and we try to have you all on the wrap-up so you can have a chance to participate if you happen to miss a meeting, so you can go ahead and have a say on anything you miss. So if you can help us coordinate any dates that are in conflict for you, then the chair and I can work on seeing what we can do to make other arrangements.
Okay, and you'd like that as soon as possible.
That'd be great, because what we do then is we fill in all the departments and get the department heads aligned.
Lalo, do you have an extra copy of that?
I sure do.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Although, didn't the Policy and Services Committee have a recommendation to move committee to Wednesday rather than Tuesday?
To my understanding that the item is still outstanding, it did not get heard, and so...
I could weigh in on that.
Oh, please.
Well, I think that there's some there might be some pullback from that as well, because Wednesday is the night of a lot of regional body meetings, and if we shift our, and I was originally in favor of until I realized this, that if we shift our committee meetings to Wednesday nights, then council members liaising to any regional body becomes almost impossible, or becomes a conflict, and given our interest in how things in our neighbors affect us, that would probably not be good for Palo Alto.
In addition, the UAC meets on Wednesday nights. Another conflict.
So we should take these Tuesday, Thursdays as...
I believe so,
where the
because
meetings will be.
there may be further discussion by the new PNS, but at this point, we're assuming that we're going Tuesday, Thursday.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Can I ask a couple things then?
Please.
So Just generally, one of the things that came up earlier was there was a discussion about the administrative penalty schedule, which I guess we review once a year. Is that the kind of thing that comes to finance?
It does. It comes to you as part of the budget process, which is the May schedule.
Okay.
So the mini fee schedule will be listed specifically. What we will do is bring you staff recommended changes, and at that point in time, you as a committee have the opportunity to ask for any updates or changes on anything else that staff doesn't recommend.
You're the one that brought that up.
So clarification on that is that a time, I mean, I don't want to slow down the budget hearing process.
Right.
Is that a time or an earlier time, sometime we should be discussing how we do or don't assess and collect penalties?
Sure. I would say from a financial perspective that would be the best time, because you have the whole picture with you. We try to put the fee schedule a little bit later in the budget hearings, but even so, by then, you're going to have an understanding of where we stand financially, so you're making an informed decision. And it may be irrelevant to the bottom line, but that was the thinking of how we structure those hearings.
So can I make a comment that's maybe a little bit counter to that? Is, to me, it doesn't matter, and I'm not sure that it does to the community, what the cumulative dollar amount is.
Sure.
It's our enforcement capability and proactive actions in that regard. So is that consistent with any of the council members?
Let's see, my recollection of this process was we did have a discussion about that a year ago in May, right? From the perspective of when we talked about staffing and compliance, right? But I think that was the only discussion that we had on that. We didn't go more broadly than that.
Right, we added the position.
We added a position.
Yeah.
So I'm a little concerned about slowing down, like I said, slowing down the budget process. We're going to have a discussion about collecting penalty assessments, or even assessing and collecting them. I can see that there's so much to go through during the budget cycle that it could be not very favorably viewed.
Let me talk to the city manager and to Hillary and see what can be done, because obviously the brunt of the analysis or any work needs to be with them. So let me check that. I see some windows in April, so we'll have to take a look at just it's a matter of checking in with staff.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask the Section 115 discussion. Does that come back to Finance Committee, or does it just go into the 2017 budgeting process?
So the way we were looking at it, that it's going to be part of your March 7th council meeting discussion.
Okay.
At that point, I suppose the council could send it back to finance if there's...
But it goes to the full council. On
right.
What's the 117?
That's the pension trust. I noticed on the earlier list there is a police services utilization and resources study.
Correct.
And that's going to come?
So that's one where
to be scheduled.
Yeah, there's a couple items that are to be scheduled there that we're working on with the departments, and that's been a challenging one, as you can tell from the date. And so, let me continue to check in with the department. If you do not hear back from us, we have the May budget hearings when the police budget comes.
Understand. One of the things that came up was in the National Citizen Survey showed that Palo Alto had the highest public safety expenses of any city in the region. Right? And so I assumed that would get some discussion, and we started talking about it would be one of the topics covered in a topic.
I don't, unfortunately, I don't have it in front of me, but there may, if it's public safety and it's broad, then it includes the Stanford coverage.
Yeah, that's because the worker numbers here are so much higher than the population.
But we can definitely, I think
it was per capita. I think it was
Per resident capita.
per resident. Yeah, but maybe the
It
Stanford,
shows up very high per capita because they
Yes.
only count the residents.
Yeah, not Stanford.
But the working day population is so
Right.
large.
one thing that Councilmember Schmidt has done in the past, and I think it's appropriate, is he correlates that with the long range and the budget discussions in the comp plan.
Who pays for the
Yeah.
Right. And then finally, I know you're tired of hearing about this,
That's right.
but at what point do we have, do we discuss a strategy to enable, right now, the unfunded actuarial liability, we assess once per year with John Bartel, which doesn't enable us to consider that as we do budgeting and cost recovery and staffing decisions and things like that. At what point do we look at a strategy to enable us to actually calculate that on the fly so that we can use it in operating decisions?
I think it would be appropriate when Mr. Bartel comes before you March 7th to indicate some assignment to the committee, finance committee, that you want some further analysis and some template or methodology.
Yeah, I think what we need is, we need a big table or a template or a model or something like that.
I think
because
that
we can't just send it, because, I mean, he does fantastic work, but, it takes 2 months and, expensive and so forth.
I think that would be my suggestion or recommendation, that would be brought up at that point, that have you as a council decide how you want to handle that and direct to the committee or direct it to staff at that point if there's agreement.
Yeah, would have an impact on the budget.
And then finally, I would, through our mechanisms, and the city's got a great and appropriate focus on the UAL, but to the best of my knowledge, we don't have a plan to pay down OPEB. Is that something that we discuss it in finance committees?
Absolutely, and so we can have that discussion again when we go through the budget hearings. The retired medical is a subject, a specific item that we discussed, the funding, the current payment level, and we can talk more about it at that point, but I'll give you this much, that we're one of the few cities, we're like top 20 in terms of largest cities in California, in that group that is funding on a regular basis their annual required contribution. But I think your point is that enough?
Right.
And so that's the discussion we can have.
The fear is that it's growing faster, right?
Yeah.
So you think that's during what? You said during the budgeting?
Right, because we will, have a budget recommendation to you, which right now is the current council policy is to fund the annual required contribution, even though it's not required.
Right.
It's one of those catchy things.
Right. Okay.
If I could put a word in, I guess number
Please.
10 is Coverly. And I note that the school district has made a decision, not to aggressively develop. So that should put the burden, I guess, back on the city to.
Yeah, I think for that one, we do need to come back. I do need to talk to the city manager because there's a plethora of issues with that. Because there's a demand for the space and our largest tenant is moving out. So we should agendize that so we can have a discussion and an update with you.
Yeah.
So can I ask a question? I had that one on my list too. It's like, I see it's on here, and I just wondered why it was on finance.
It just comes up as part of the budget process because of the significant impacts of Foothills moving out.
Okay.
And
that clarifies.
Yeah, and so there's provisions in the agreement for a rent reduction, and so we can explain all of that to you and the desires of certain members of the community or groups, I'll call it, for that space. And so there's a lot of issues. So we do need to come to you and have an update and a discussion.
Would that also include, I understand that some RFPs might be going out, but I don't know how soon, for some other nonprofits to step in where Foothill's moving out?
So it's not for the Foothill space, but other space that is available, there'll be some RFPs coming out.
Okay.
And anybody that's made it known to us that they're looking for space, we're adding them to that list.
Okay. So what's the timing of that?
Let me double check because there was an update, and so it held up the process. I need to check and let you know.
Okay. There are some nonprofits in it, so thank you for that. And then, do I dare mention zero-based budgeting? And if we could have a discussion about that and, how we might do it, incrementally, meaning not all departments at once, but what that would entail, what an approach might be, what the advantages and disadvantages are. Are other council members interested in that?
This comes up from time to time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a significant undertaking that where it might be, if I may suggest that the chair have a discussion with the city manager and, take it from there. I don't feel that I can provide you a response to that at my level. I think it needs to be a discussion because of the magnitude of the work and the implications on the work plans, because it's a significant undertaking, and I do note that you're saying face it in, and so it's something that I think it's a discussion that needs to be had with the city manager.
Well, we could also, pending that discussion, we could agendize it at the finance committee or not. No, there's no way to do it citywide. It would just be an enormous undertaking. But
Let me discuss with the city manager, and then maybe we can agendize it after that.
Can I ask a quick
because, as you
question?
say, it does come up. Or I guess Lala was saying it does come up.
It has been asked before, yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just wanted to check. This won't be our last opportunity to talk about future agendas.
We do it at the end of every meeting.
Every meeting.
Right, exactly. So
Mhm.
we can hopefully hear back any thoughts following your discussion with the city manager and maybe take it from there.
I do have one other question, if I could. Business registry. What's the status of the end of phase 2 and when that data might be coming forward? And
So I can't answer completely. I apologize. I'm not up to date. I do know I did see that there's a recommendation for staffing coming to you for Monday the 8th. And so there's a discussion in there as to where they're at and some deadlines. I was working on another project, so I had other staff look at it and read it, and I didn't get a chance to read it, so I don't know exactly all the details.
okay.
Okay. Let's see. With that, we move to the next, to which I guess is adjournment. So, meeting adjourned.
Thank
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
2 hours.